Alright, the title of this video, the subject of this video is I want to teach Kung Fu professionally, but I am not Chinese. Now, I've made a lot of videos, not a lot, but recently I've made a lot of videos about speaking about this. And this topic is mainly about Jake Mason, what he's doing, and it's been boggling my mind thinking about this. And it's not just Jake Mace, it's beyond what's going on with him. It's just the problems in the martial arts altogether. Somebody needs to step in as an authority to do something about it, to say something about it, and to properly educate people into the proper way to approach this matter. Because the thing is, the government has no control over it. They have given up control over it. So it is unregulated. The martial arts is completely unregulated. And there needs to be true martial art teachers and masters that have integrity from within themselves to self-regulate themselves, in which to truly represent the martial arts the way that it's meant to be, in an honest and pure way. So I'm not just speaking about Jake Mace, I'm talking about everybody out there that's practicing the martial arts, and especially everybody out there that's teaching the martial arts. There's got to be the right approach, the true approach. Now, when it comes to this topic, I want to teach Kung Fu professionally, but I am not Chinese. Can it be done? Well, it can be done, but it is not an easy thing to do, according to my standards and how it should be done. To me, it is similar, if not more difficult, than trying to become a real doctor in America currently. Not a doctor in China, but a doctor in America. I don't know the regulations in China about how hard it is to be a doctor, but I am familiar with the regulations and how difficult it is to be a doctor here in America. So to do that, to be able to teach Kung Fu professionally in a legitimate way, not through not a fraudulent way, but in a legitimate way, it should be just as difficult to do that than to become a doctor, than to become a lawyer, and of course, a lot more difficult than just being a police officer, a lot more difficult than just being a firefighter. As difficult, or not more, if not more difficult than being a CPA. Like, these are all professions that require a lot of self-growth and development, and it just doesn't happen overnight. So there's a lot of requirements involved, and it should be just as difficult, if not more difficult, than being a professor as well. So to do it legitimately, in my eyes, you'd have to study under a Chinese Kung Fu master. So I'll use an example. Say Bruce Lee. Say hypothetically Bruce Lee still was living today. And say he's about 80 years old. And if you've been studying under Bruce Lee for 20, 30 years, and he said, and you're not Chinese, but you've been studying with Bruce Lee for 20, 30 years, and then he says, you're ready to teach. You're ready to pass on this art. Then that is legitimate. But the legitimacy only will last as long as the relationship between you and Bruce Lee is intact. If for whatever reason the relationship ends up becoming destroyed, then you can no longer represent Kung Fu legitimately. Because the relationship between you and Bruce Lee is no longer intact. So it's similar to kind of what's going on, these scandals in Hollywood. Kevin Spacey, for example, been a lawyer, been an actor for a long time, very successful, famous actor. But these allegations have come out about him, you know, sexually molesting little boys, 14-year-old boys, and then all of a sudden, they're pretty much blacklisting him off of Hollywood. They've removed him in movies that are upcoming. They've removed him in TV shows, and they pretty much are banning him from Hollywood. So it could happen that quick. Relationships can be destroyed that quick. So he's no longer associated within that industry in a positive way, even though he was an actor for so many years. So if Bruce Lee is your Kung Fu master, and you're learning from him, and you're studying with him for 20, 30 years, and all of a sudden, you know, you go into class and you're teaching a kids class, and then you start molesting little boys or little girls or whatever, and then he pretty much disowns you from his school, from his art, then you have no right to teach that art, and you have no right to teach Kung Fu, because you don't have a real Chinese Kung Fu master overlooking you in any way, shape, or form. If you want to represent the Kung Fu art, the Chinese martial arts, then you need a legitimate Chinese martial art master, Chinese Kung Fu master that is above you and dictating you into telling you what is correct and what is incorrect as far as the expression of that art is concerned. Once you eliminate that master from the picture and you put yourself up as the master yourself, then you are no longer representing Kung Fu, because you are not a Chinese person. If you were a Chinese person, then you can deviate from that master in which to create your own Kung Fu, just like Bruce Lee did. So Yip Man was over Bruce Lee with the Wing Chun style, and then Bruce Lee didn't like how things were going, so he decided to disassociate with Wing Chun and then create his own expression of the Kung Fu. Ended up calling it Jun Fan Kung Fu, and then eventually Jeet Kune Do. Jeet Kune Do is Chinese words to label his art. And he was the master of his own expression of the martial art, his own expression of the Chinese martial art. That is okay because he is Chinese, or he was Chinese. But if he was a white person, he could not do that legitimately, no matter how long he's been training in Chinese martial arts under a Chinese master. Even if he's been training with a Chinese Kung Fu master for 30 years, if that master disowns him, then he cannot claim Kung Fu anymore legitimately. Now, situations may arise where your master might die. Your Chinese Kung Fu master might die, and the relationship was still intact, and it was good, everything was going good, but then he died unexpectedly, just like Bruce Lee died. And Danny Insano, for example, was his student. Shannon Lee was his daughter. Brandon Lee was his son. He unexpectedly dies. Danny Insano still cannot represent Kung Fu any longer because he is not Chinese, you know. But if there is like a written will from Bruce Lee that specifically states that I'm passing on my art to Danny Insano to manage and to be the head instructor, the head Sifu for this art of Jeet Kune Do. If it specifically states in his will, and those are Bruce Lee's wishes, then that could be legitimate, but it has to be backed by the law. Basically, he's passing on assets. He's passing on, like, wealth, and if that is a legitimate document from Bruce Lee, then Danny Sano can be representing that art at that moment if Bruce Lee says that. But when he passes away, then it could get sticky. Because if Danny Sano is not properly representing it, then he's destroying the reputation of what Bruce Lee has established. But even if he is representing it well, he is still not Bruce Lee, and he doesn't have that energy of Bruce Lee to be able to change what to change. So there's going to be problems in either way. Then the art kind of becomes a tradition. It becomes dead. And that was exactly what Bruce Lee was speaking against. So even if it is a legitimate passing on of the art through legal documentation, it still doesn't mean that that's the way and that's the truth. And that's real. It's not living anymore. So, honestly, it's something that, I cannot honestly say that that would be real Jeet Kune Do. That can't be. Because all types of authority that is passed on in that manner, there is expiration to it. It is not everlasting. It's like the same thing as a marriage contract. Marriages don't last forever, indefinitely guaranteed. So Danny Sano, being Filipino, still wouldn't be able to, represent Jeet Kune Do if Bruce Lee's not there. Now Shannon Lee, she's the actual blood of Bruce Lee, and she's half Caucasian, half Chinese. She could legitimately create her own martial art way, call it Shannon Lee's Kung Fu, and teach that. And she could study her father's methods as much as she can. She could study under Danny Insano, learn from Danny Insano, watch Bruce's movies, learn from that, read his books, learn from that, create her own method in Kung Fu, call it Shannon Lee's Kung Fu, and then she is known to be Bruce Lee's daughter. She can legitimately do that because she's half Chinese, half Caucasian. That's fine. But it's still not Jeet Kune Do. It's still not Bruce Lee, but it's his daughter. That's fine. That's no problem. That's like Will Smith having a successful acting career, and then he passes on his wealth and his opportunities to his son Jaden Smith, and then Jaden Smith creates his own movies. But he's still not Will Smith, but he is the son of Will Smith, and he has his own abilities and his own skill sets in his own right. And his last name is Smith as well, because it's been passed on through by his father. So Bruce Lee, having Shannon Lee, she could have created her own Kung Fu if she wanted to. Same thing with his son, Brandon Lee. he could have created Brandon Lee's Kung Fu. He is the son of Bruce Lee. He's teaching his own method of Kung Fu. And if they wanted to, they could legitimately say Shannon Lee's Jeet Kune Do, Brandon Lee's Jeet Kune Do. They could go ahead and do that because they are connected to the father by blood. But it's still their own expression of Jeet Kune Do and not the father's expression of Jeet Kune Do. That has to be clarified. That this is not Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do anymore, but this is my own expression of the Jeet Kune Do. They could do that. But as far as, say there's a, say James Dean was learning from Bruce Lee and Jeet Kune Do at the time. Bruce Lee passes away unexpectedly. He cannot say James Dean Kung Fu, James Dean Jeet Kune Do. No. Not legitimately. He can't say James Dean Kung Fu because he is not Chinese himself, and there's no living Chinese master overlooking his expression of the Kung Fu. And there's no Bruce Lee looking over his expression of the Jeet Kune Do. So he wouldn't be able to legitimately do that. He could go around and create his own martial art, say James Dean martial arts, and I studied with Bruce Lee for a couple years, and this is my expression of martial arts. He could legitimately do that because the martial arts is not, it's not being used to label any type of culture or group of people. He's Caucasian, so he should represent the martial arts. Or if he wanted to, he could turn it into kickboxing. Say James Dean kickboxing, James Dean boxing, James Dean self-defense, James Dean street self-defense. That would be the proper way to do it. In order to professionally teach and also to legitimately, with integrity, go out there to the world and teach on the internet, on YouTube, or wherever. In order to legitimately do that, that is what I would say has to be done. If Bruce Lee was alive and, he's running his school, you might be a non-Chinese person in that school and you've been there for 10 years. And then he's like, well, I need some help teaching, so why don't you run this class? That's completely fine because that's Bruce Lee's school. He's the Chinese Kung Fu master. He gave you permission to help run that class. And say you wanted to teach your friends and family, then he gives you permission, you could teach them what I've shown you, then that's fine. But if you're a student of Bruce Lee and you've been there for 10 years and then all of a sudden, you go out on the internet, you start teaching the world without letting him know, and you start teaching the world what you learned, that's not right. You can't do that unless you get his permission to do that. If you don't get his permission to teach online, then you can't do that. If you don't get his permission to teach your own family and friends, you can't do that. If you don't get his permission to teach in the classroom, you can't do that. And if you do that, that could be grounds for him to expel you from the school because you're not adhering to his authority. That is his art. That is his way. And if you get expelled from the school, you're not allowed to use Jeet Kune Do and say that you teach Jeet Kune Do, and you're not even allowed to say that you teach Kung Fu because you are not a Chinese person. Now, if you were a Chinese person in the same scenario, and then he expels you from the school, you still won't be allowed to say that you teach Jeet Kune Do. But you can say that you teach Kung Fu, your own Kung Fu. And there's nothing he could do about that. You're not breaking any codes because you're a Chinese person yourself and you have your own expression of Kung Fu. Just like Jackie Chan has his expression of Kung Fu, Jet Li has his expression of Kung Fu. But Tony Jaa is a Thai person. That is not Kung Fu. That's his Thai martial art expression. And that's how it has to be. That's the true way that has to be upheld and self-regulated through personal integrity. You know, and at this moment, the law is not doing anything about it. They can't. So the law is not regulating it. So the true martial art teachers out there, the true masters out there, they have to self-regulate it. And that's the way that it has to be. You know, that's how I see it.